name is Bryce Macauley, and I work in student employment, which is part of the Career Development Center. I can tell you that Appalachian cares about the future success of all students and has loads of resources to help you with your professional development and career readiness. Career Readiness is basically a batch of A skills that research has shown care about with their new hires. And you can see those skills listed on the screen right now. Anything you can do to enhance and communicate these specific skills to employers is a plus. You can go to the Career Development Center's website to learn more. To invest in your professional development, we offer the following program, and I know you're bound to get something useful out of it. Enjoy.
Okay, alrighty. Then we're going to get started. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Bryce Macauley, and I'm a senior financing major. I currently work at the Career Development Center as a student assistant with student employment. We're so glad that all of you are here tonight. Thank you so much for coming here and being on time. Thank you guys, and you guys are so awesome. Thank you guys. Before we get started tonight, I just want to take a brief moment to thank the Career Development Center and Handshake for providing us this wonderful opportunity tonight. If you're not aware, Handshake is a career services platform and is offered to just about 1,100 colleges and universities across the U.S. and in an effort to connect students with employers, recruiting for internships and jobs. To talk more about this interesting topic with us tonight is Christine Cruzvergara, VP of Higher Education and Student Success. Student Success with Handshake. She has written several articles in ways students can be successful, and hopefully she can teach us how to tonight. Christine, thank you so much for being here tonight.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Before we begin, I'm going to ask Christina the first several questions. They will have time for you to ask a few questions at the end. This is just tend to be more like a conversation just between me and Christine for the time being. And then if we have time at the end, you just go ahead and speak up your question at the end when we're done. Okay. All right. Well, let's just go ahead and just jump right into it. Christine, like I said, thank you so much for being here tonight. So my first question is, you're in quite a high level position at a large national company. I'd love to briefly hear your general professional journey, and if there's a moment or two along the way where you feel the choice you made in that moment changed or strengthened your trajectory.
Sure. So I have been at Handshake for a couple of years, 2 years to be exact. And prior to Handshake, I spent the past decade of my career in higher education. I primarily worked in career services, but I also dabbled in student activities and new student orientation. My background in my schooling was essentially psychology, and then I went to grad school for college student personnel, which essentially means that you're getting trained to work at a college or a university, mostly in student services. So that's sort of how I started my career. And to be perfectly honest, when I applied to grad school and I was filling out my grad school applications, you have to fill out a goal statement of what it is you want to do or where you want to be sort of 15, 20 years from now. And I am someone who has never been able to answer that question. I don't know. I don't even know necessarily what I want to do next or where I want to be in 5 years per se. And so it was hard to answer that question. And as a first gen student, I also didn't have parents that had kind of gone through this process. And a lot of my peers were like, well, I want to be a vice president one day, or I want to be a dean of students, or I want to be a director. And the reality was I didn't really understand what those jobs were. Like, what do you actually do day to day when you are in those roles? And it's hard to aspire sometimes to something that you don't know. And so what I wrote in my goal statement was, I care about people and I care about making a difference for the people that I interact with. And so as long as I'm making a difference in the life of at least one person, I feel like I'm fulfilling some level of purpose or calling in my life. And I'm okay with whatever that title or position or role happens to be, as long as I'm doing that. And so when I look backwards in my career, that's probably one of the major themes and threads through all of my different positions, regardless of position, role, title, company, or organization, was that I was making a difference, either for my team and the people that I supervised or for the students that I served. The second theme that I realized I really had in my career was change. I love change. I don't like the status quo. I love being able to improve things, whether it's at a small programmatic level or at a larger sort of organizational level, or if it's even at a systemic level. And so everything about all of my jobs has some element of change management to it. And so that's probably one of the easiest ways to sort of think about me is I like change and I want to make a difference.
That's amazing, Christine. I know a lot of us are still in college, where that's either from freshman to senior. And like even now, we still don't know what to do, but we're getting on the right track. And I just think that's just amazing. I know myself, like when I was first starting out as a college student, everything changed from like I want to do this to I want to do that, and you never like really know what you're gonna do. Like you have like these plans for like one specific thing, and then like plans change, and like you find out like who you really are. So that's really amazing that of all those experiences.
Thank you. Yeah, 100%. Your life is sort of, in my opinion, your life is meant to be created and it's meant to be designed and it's meant to be crafted, right? And so you'll do that as you continue on in your career and in your life, and you don't need to have necessarily a plan because you'll figure it out as you go along. You'll put those pieces together.
Definitely. So along with the successes that you said that you had, I'm pretty sure like you've encountered some sort of challenges or obstacles. Is there any way you can share maybe like one or two of them and how you overcame?
Yeah, sure, of course. Gosh, how far back do I want to go? Let me kind of I'll give you one really personal story that has it was pretty sort of moving for me because it was a turning point in kind of a realization. And then I will give you another example of just generally stuff that you kind of experience like all the time that is a challenge. So I advanced fairly quickly throughout my career in higher education and was a young woman of color in positions and in rooms where I was often sitting at the table with people who were 15, 20, 25 years senior to me. And with that, I realized I had a smaller margin of error. When I spoke, when I asked questions, when I offered ideas, right? When I gave a strategy, I had a smaller margin of error because people might have other assumptions about me and about what it meant to be me coming into a room that may or may not be correct, but I couldn't control that. And so my age for a long time was an identity that was very salient to me in a lot of my positions. And then when I actually transitioned into this role at Handshake and into tech, my age was no longer the most salient because I'm certainly, as you can imagine, at 37, not the youngest anymore in the room, but very much it was the fact that I'm a woman of color. And you don't see as many women of color in leadership roles in tech generally. I actually feel very fortunate at Handshake that our gender parity is almost 50-50 for a tech company. And we actually have a large number of people of color, but at the leadership level, not as many yet. And that's one of the things that we need to improve. And so I give you that context because one of my very first positions, I was hired into a role that had a fancy title. So tip number one, don't be enamored by fancy titles. Actually look at the job description and the role of what you are going into. And I wanted to help improve things and to help change things. And so I offered a lot of ideas and I offered a lot of suggestions around what we could do. And when I left that role, I was having lunch with a colleague, and the politics at that particular organization was challenging. And as we were talking, he said, you know, you really gave them a run for their money. You're not what they expected. And I will never forget this conversation because I said, what do you mean by that? What did they expect? And he's like, oh, you know what I mean. And I was like, no, you tell me what they meant. What do you think they were talking about? And he's like, well, just, you know, I mean, you're like a young Asian lady. They just sort of assumed you would say yes more of the time. And honestly, I was shocked. I still get goosebumps when I tell this story because I was so angry and so frustrated, and I was thrown off guard because all of a sudden it reminded me of a lot of conversations I had had with my dad growing up, where both my parents are immigrants and they have an accent. And he had said, you know, you're lucky that you're born here and you don't have an accent will help you, but you have to remember that you're still not white. And sometimes when people look at you, they're going to see that. And that's going to come with certain expectations and certain assumptions. And growing up, I didn't get it. I didn't get that. And so often I fought against it with my own parents and saying like, that doesn't happen anymore. That's not true. And here I was in this professional moment where somebody was telling me that there were assumptions made about me, that I was essentially just going to be the yes woman because I was young and inexperienced was the assumption, because I was Asian and submissive was the assumption, right? And I wasn't those things. And I surprised them because I had a backbone and because I had integrity and because I stood up for certain things that I felt like were right. And I realized in that moment that every room I walked into, somebody might have an assumption about me that is not the same as how I see myself. And it's going to be up to me to start to change that impression that people might have, and that I can't control what people walk in with, but I can help to start influencing what they'll walk away with. And that's a lot of pressure. It's a responsibility, but it is one that I take seriously. But it was definitely a stark realization. So that was a long story. I will stop there, but that's a very honest story of one of the challenges I've had.
And I think a lot of people in this Zoom meeting can not relate to essentially everything that's going on, but we understand that society today is a lot different to what it was years ago, and it's still improving. So I mean, honestly, we see it getting a lot better. So that's definitely amazing. And yes, I'm sorry, I'm at a loss for words.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah, but that's amazing. So going off how much experience you've had, which is a lot, and especially with that story that you told, that's something you never forget. I was actually reading your 5 thoughts on leadership through your LinkedIn account, and there's just like this one quote that I just kind of drew from, and it's just like, and the quote goes, "Who you are and how others see you will be defined for you, whether you want it to or not." Is there any way you could say more to that, and why we need to be more mindful of this while we're even still in college?
Yeah, sure. So the context that I wrote that particular quote is that I believe one of the greatest leadership lessons I've ever learned is that repetition builds reputation. Okay. Repetition builds reputation. And what I mean by that is you will not be defined by the major accolades in your life, the big awards that you win, the grand gesture that you might have. It's by the daily actions that you show your colleagues and your peers and your friends and your family every single day. It's how you show up. It's how you say hello. It's how you help people. It's how you respond to an email. It's how you get back to someone when they can't do anything for you and you don't need anything, but they do, right? It's those little types of actions that actually craft who you are and actually end up defining how people see you and how people will talk about you and how they will define you. You might want to define yourself by the big award, by your bio, by the major thing you've done on your resume, but other people will define you based on the everyday actions of what they see you consistently do over and over and over again. And so we have to think about that. And so that particular quote calls your attention to the fact that even if you want others to see you a different way, if your daily actions don't actually reinforce that brand, it probably won't. They're still going to define you differently. And so you have to think about, how do you want someone to define you? How would you like somebody to see you or think about you? And what are the things that are within your control that you can actually do on a daily basis that reinforce that, right? That brings that to life more frequently. And so I think as college students, that is obviously true again in how you treat others, in how you carry yourself in your own presence, when you show up in class, when you go to your student orgs, when you participate in activities with your colleagues and your peers, all of that matters. Those everyday actions when you wake up, that matters.
Definitely. I honestly spoke to that. I live essentially by that majority every day. I also work a second job that's off campus while working on campus. And it can be a lot, but I mean, all of us here can relate that
we have different parts of ourselves that we show to different people, especially when we work. And it's not that we want to, it's just how it comes out. Like whenever me and my friends we were playing this game at one time, and it was like whoever had I'm trying to think of how this game went. Well, the question was who is the nicest, and who would give up a kidney, and like all my friends would like automatically point at me. I was like, why are you guys pointing at me? Like, I wouldn't really think twice. He goes, well, to us, like, if somebody were to ask you like to do this, you would do it like without question. So it's just pretty empowering, like the effect that you have on people just by like the not even like the legacy that you leave. I mean, I guess the legacy that you would leave, but just like the impressions that you would put on people. So I just found that like really just like it connected to me like on an emotional level, and I'm sorry. But I just found it really
no,
so.
Thank you.
So another actually going based off of your another one of your the same article, another lesson that really spoke to me was striving to respond and not to react. Is there any way you could share with others in attendance how you came to this realization and how it benefited you?
Sure. So yes, the second lesson is strive to respond, not react. And this is actually a really interesting tidbit that I heard on a women's panel when I was a young professional. I happened to be in a professional development sort of conference, happened to sit in on a panel, and one of the speakers said it, and it wasn't even a major point. It was just kind of a throwaway comment. But it really stuck with me. And the reason it stuck with me personally is because I know that I am emotional. I know that my emotions are there and that they matter and that I feel them. And for a long time, I would say through most of my 20s and even my early 30s, professionally, I felt guilty for that. I felt bad that I had those emotions. I felt like I shouldn't. I felt like if I were a better professional, I would be able to sort of separate that or keep that at bay. And it wasn't until I got older that I realized, you know what? Actually, your emotions are important because it's the same thing that allows me to be really empathetic. It's the same thing that allows me to be really good at connecting with other people. It's the thing that makes me really good at building relationships. And it is literally the thing that allows me to do what I do best in being able to lead a team, to motivate and inspire them around a vision, and to be able to create buy-in with other stakeholders and constituents. You can't do those things if you don't understand and are not in tune with people's emotions and your own emotions and sort of how all of those dynamics work together, right? And so for me, one of the things that I remembered about that quote was, when you strive to respond and not react, you are using your emotions intentionally rather than sort of being held hostage by your emotions. And that was an important differentiation that I needed to be able to make. Because when somebody annoys me or something happens that upsets me, do I have a gut visceral reaction? 100%, of course I do. And I know to share that with my partner or with my family or with my close friends, right? The people at work don't necessarily need to see that. I can step away because I know I need to process through that first. And then I can come back to my team with more of a response. Now, that's not to say the response isn't going to have emotion in it. It's just going to have a more intentional emotion around what I feel like will be most productive in that situation. Because sometimes annoyance is the right emotion to have for a situation and how you address it. Sadness sometimes is the right emotion to have for that, right? And so emotions can be very powerful catalysts, even in the work world. It's more about the intentionality of it rather than letting that emotion sort of drive you. You are driving the emotion. And so that was one of those lessons that for me personally was super important for me to learn how to channel my emotion in a really powerful and productive way.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure a lot of us do the same thing, especially with like just taking a moment, trying to process what happened, and then just jump right back in and just be like, okay, here's what we need to do essentially. So that's amazing. So moving forward, I was actually wondering, were you always able to follow your own guidance on leadership, and which piece of advice is most difficult to remember in the moment?
um, Generally speaking, yes. The 5 lessons, and if any of you are interested, please feel free to check it out on my LinkedIn. We can connect after this. My only request is that if you could just write me a little message about how we met and that you were part of this particular event tonight, that's always super helpful. So I know to accept your invitation. So generally, yes, those particular 5 lessons are things that I really do live by. And it's been fairly easy for me to follow because they are so aligned with my values. They're aligned with sort of who I am as a person. And they've guided me and they've shaped me into sort of the person that I am today. So I see them as sort of one and the same. And so that's been really useful. I would say the part that sometimes is hard for me to remember and over time and experience has helped is the very last one, which is authenticity is the best strategy. I think this one is challenging sometimes because it is hard to always be authentic. Sometimes it makes you feel really vulnerable, and sometimes it exposes your own insecurities. And there are moments and settings where I sometimes am less comfortable being totally authentic because I don't know if I have credibility in that space. I don't know if I have advocates in that space. I don't know how what I say might be taken or received in that space. And so sometimes I have to challenge myself in those moments to remember that I've gotten to where I am because I have been authentic. And again, authenticity does not mean to be brash and to excuse it by saying I'm being authentic, but it is to be to have a deeper understanding of who you are, how you think, how you approach things, to be real with that in your communication and your approach, while also factoring in and understanding your context and your audience, right? And all of those things. And so I think that is one that I would say, while I definitely do more often than not, there are moments where it can be hard.
Definitely, a lot of us struggle with authenticity, and like, especially like myself, like I do struggle with a little authenticity sometimes. But I mean, sometimes your authentic self is your best self. So, but that's amazing. So essentially, like when it comes to leadership, you also have to have a lot of not networking experience, but you have to like know a lot of people, especially within leadership. So that brings me to my next question. And considering networking, we all heard it's important, but we sometimes are confused about what it is and why it really matters. In your own words, is there any way you can like kind of like tell us like in a way what networking is and maybe like what it looks like and why it's important? Maybe with like using like your leadership qualities that you've listed.
Sure. Real simply, networking is building relationships. That's all it is. It's building relationships. It's not collecting business cards. It's not making connections on LinkedIn. It's building relationships. That's actual networking. And so the reality is you all are actually probably quite good at much of your networking already because you've built relationships with different people. You've built relationships with your friends when you went to school, right? You have, I'm sure all of you at minimum have one other friend that you have made while you've been at school. That's a relationship. That is part of your network. You've probably made relationships when you've been in class projects, when you have participated in student organizations, right? When you've done volunteer work, any of those things, you've likely built some kind of a relationship. And that's all networking is. It is taking some kind of genuine interest in somebody else, and they are taking some level of interest in you. And all you're doing is learning about each other. It's that simple. And I think sometimes networking feels harder because people talk about it as sort of this big thing that you have to do, and that person's going to connect you to so-and-so and help you over here and so on and so forth. And yeah, sometimes that happens. But the reality is we actually do a lot of that already, right? Like if some of you have younger siblings who are maybe thinking about starting to go to school, I imagine they might be asking you some questions about what it's like to be in college or university. And maybe you're telling them, you know what, I actually know somebody that goes to so-and-so institution. Why don't you talk to them? Or I think I want to work at the library, or I want to work over here. Do you know anybody? Right. And people are kind of helping you get connected. That's networking. And I think it's when you're able to sort of make it about relationships, it makes it more authentic and it keeps it more real. and it feels less awkward and it feels less fake. And I think the other piece to keep in mind too is, like any other relationship in your life, some people you're going to click with and some people you're not. And not everyone's going to get back to you, right? And so it's also not that unlike dating, quite frankly, in some ways. As you get to know more people, you reach out to people, you're not going to hear back from every single person, right? When I work with students on networking, usually for every 10 people that they reach out to start a conversation or do an informational interview to learn more about that person, maybe they hear back from five of them. Okay, so 50% of the people that you reach out to. And then of the 5 people that you talk to, you might learn something from each of them, but you're probably only going to feel like a real connection to maybe 1 or 2 of them. Okay, so now out of the 10 people, every 10 people you reached out to, you maybe feel a connection with 1 or 2, right? It's a numbers game. So it's not you. Don't hold all of that on you. It's just part of the process. And you have to meet those folks and have those conversations to start to figure out if you feel like there's a connection or not.
Right, and that's pretty big. I mean, well, like with myself as a business major, I get told, especially like you have to have this big amount, like these big networks to get into all these different places. But like you try and go and reach out, and maybe you have like maybe 1 or 2 respond, like you said, and then it's just kind of like, you know, like I have this relationship with like these 2 people, and like that's kind of like essentially that's it. But I mean that's good advice, and but essentially you have a huge network at this point as well. So that goes into my next question. Who was the biggest influence on your professional life along the way, and who's your biggest professional influence now?
Ooh, honestly, I have so many people. I will name for you 3 individuals in particular that have had quite an impact on my life in 3 different ways. So one was a woman named Sarah Jean Kelly. She is still a dear friend and colleague of mine. We worked together and we were peers when we were at Georgetown. And she is someone who saw potential in me and pushed me in ways that I had never really been challenged before. She was the first person I worked with that genuinely asked for feedback and really wanted to hear it. She was okay hearing negative feedback. And she was also okay dishing negative feedback. And I had never really worked with anybody before that was so willing to be direct and to be so open. And I will never forget, she's someone that has a clear point of view. She's an opinionated person. She still is to this day. And I remember at one point she asked me my opinion about something, and she told me what she thought, and she asked me what I thought. And I hesitated for a second before I answered. And she called me on it. And she was like, do you actually think that? Or do you not? Because you hesitated for a second. And she's like, because I actually want to know what you think. And so I said, well, you know, and I remember kind of hedging a little bit. And then I told her what I thought. And she was like, well, tell me why. Like, give me the rationale for that. And I gave her my rationale. And I remember sounding a little bit tentative when I did it. And she thought about it and she was like, it's a really good point. You've convinced me. I agree. I agree that might have been a better option. And I was like floored, because I mean, the reality is like, truly, how many people do we talk to on a regular basis that are actually willing to possibly change their mind when presented with different information, right? And I remember that's been a real cornerstone of our relationship, because she said to me, you have solid thoughts, you have solid rationale. I would love to hear it more. Like, I would love for you to share that more and to like hold firm and feel good about that. And so she really taught me to find my voice. She taught me to feel comfortable and confident with that. And I knew myself well enough at that point that anytime somebody with a really strong point of view or an opinion, especially if they hierarchically were in a position that was more senior to me, voiced it first, I was less likely to voice my opinion, right? Because at that point, I was trying to learn my voice. I was trying to find myself. So I remember saying to my supervisor back then, I said, you know, one of the things that I want to get better at is to be able to share my opinion or my point of view or my argument and be able to back it up with data or back it up with information and rationale for why. And my ask for you is, if you don't mind, could you ask me my opinion first before sharing yours, so that I am forced to have to tell you where I stand before hearing you. and then we can actually engage in a conversation around it. And that was one of the asks that I had for my boss at the time, and she did, and it was very helpful. I no longer have this issue whatsoever. That was Sarah. Another person that was really meaningful for me was Farouk Day. And he was a dear colleague and mentor of mine, and he took an interest in me. We've never actually worked at the same place or the same organization ever, but we're in a similar field. We're in the same field together. And we met through a national organization, national association, and we worked together as part of like a commission, a group. And he saw potential in me and encouraged me to really do something with that, to speak more, to present more, to write more, and to get those ideas out there. And so he took an interest in my growth and development and sort of became kind of an advocate of me in our field in a way that no one else had. And that, quite frankly, I didn't even know I needed or wanted. And so that has been really special. And at every major sort of transition point for me in terms of the different positions I've held, he was someone who was a really good sounding board on whether or not something might be a good opportunity. And he more often than not pushed me towards something that he felt like, you can do this. You don't see it yet, but you have the capacity to learn it. You have the capacity to be able to step into it. It will be hard. You will cry sometimes. You will not always like it, but you can do it. And so that's been really helpful. And then I would say the last person was a woman named Pat Coretta. She's amazing and truly probably one of my best supervisors. And she was really pivotal because, again, she worked with me at a point where I had a chance to take on this huge leadership role that she gave me. And she saw, once again, I think, capacity or potential in my ability to lead that I had yet to sort of fully see or form. And so even though all three of these individuals sort of worked with me at different points in my life, I suppose the one common thread was they all saw something in me that I yet could not see in myself. And they helped me to see that. They helped that to come to the forefront. And they helped me to learn that you're not always going to feel 100% ready for the opportunities that are in front of you. In fact, you probably should feel a little bit scared. That's a good feeling to have. That energy is important to channel. And it's okay if you're just feeling 60% ready, 70% ready, because it means you have room to grow and you have room to stretch in those ways. And so they've been they, along with many other people, have been very pivotal for me throughout my career.
That's amazing. I mean, I know, especially people that we all know that are just essentially like pivotal, whether that's our current employers or just our friends that essentially are going through the same thing, whether that's given like their opinions about like where they stand, and just the people that really like understand, like, you know, that see stuff in you. So that's amazing.
Thank you.
So that goes into my next question. So majority of us in the Zoom call, like, we're all in college, and a lot of us have picked up on various types of experience. So that means like all of us are not only student employees, but I mean, like, that's just a start. What groundwork did you lay for yourself when you were in college, and what were you thinking or even doing much about your career at that time?
Mm-hmm. I wasn't thinking too much about my career, to be honest, which is ironic because then I went on to work in a career center, to lead a career center. I now work at the intersection of college to career at Handshake. But it truly was not a huge focus for me when I was an undergrad. Getting a job was certainly a focus, but I don't know that I was like really thinking about my career the way that I hope and want students to think about their career. I was thinking about it from the standpoint of, I need to be able to find a job. I've got student loans. I need to pay them back. I need to be able to live on my own and pay my bills, right? Like, my parents have an expectation that I'm going to be able to graduate. They've worked really hard to be able to send me to school. So I need to be able to graduate and support myself. And so I thought about my career more from, I think, a very practical kind of standpoint. Now, I also felt very fortunate that because my parents sacrificed as much as they did, and quite frankly, both of them worked jobs that they were just, you know, okay with, not exactly excited about, they gave me the opportunity, in my opinion, to pursue careers that would be interesting to me and that I would actually feel fulfilled and I would be excited to wake up in the morning and to go to. And that was a very also different conversation that I had to have with my parents at one point, because they both being immigrants were, and you know, for us, I grew up mostly lower middle class. And so money was not something that we had a whole lot of, but I also don't know that I ever felt at a loss for anything. I didn't have to worry about food or clothing. My parents always sort of prioritized those things. I felt like I felt cared for. And in hindsight, I realized that we were actually, you know, didn't have a lot. But at the time as a kid, I don't know that I felt that necessarily. But what was always important to them was being able to make a good salary and having a stable job. And to them, they always wanted to kind of push me into things like the government because it was stable to them and it had a pension and it was secure, right? And I wasn't interested in that. I wanted to major in psychology, which baffled their mind because they were like, what on earth are you going to do with that? And, you know, in terms of careers, they wanted me to have a lucrative career. And I wanted to work in a university where I was not going to have a lucrative career. And so it was helping them understand that they actually had given me more than they had, which was they gave me a choice. They didn't have a choice. They had to take whatever job they could get. They had to do whatever they needed to do to be able to put food on the table, but they gave me a choice. I now am able to live a life where I get to choose a career and a job that fulfills me and gives me purpose, and allows me to craft the type of future that I want, right? And that's been really special and important. And Bryce, I apologize. I've lost track of your question and I've gone down this tangent. So I hope you all enjoyed that tangent. But if you want to repeat your question, I will answer it more directly.
No, I think that's perfect. I mean, like, I can connect with you on that, especially just like the level of like what of where you're coming from. But I that you perfectly answered the question. So
okay. Oh, I remember. You were asking like, what are some of the things I did as as a student? And I would say, honestly, I enjoyed myself as a student. I participated in student orgs. I got involved with friends. I got involved with different groups. I, you know, hung out with the people I wanted to hang out with. And it was a great time because I felt like I had a lot of sort of student leadership opportunities. I also worked on campus, similar to all of you, to make a little extra money on the side. So those were the things that I did essentially. And I don't know that I necessarily did them because I thought, oh, this will be a good resume builder or it's going to give me a lot of experience. I did it because, you know, I worked because it gave me money. And I participated in the groups because it was fun and I enjoyed the people that I had a chance to hang around with. And I think ultimately that is actually what helped me because I built genuine relationships and I ended up networking and I ended up doing all of these things, but it was because it came from an authentic place.
Of course, yeah, definitely. I just have one more question for you. So your whole life has been dedicated to helping college students get jobs. What do you notice that what do you notice that companies want to right now, like in an employee, and what's the biggest mistake college students are making regarding the job search?
Good question. What I would say is, actually, let me kind of actually reframe the answer and how I'm going to frame this for you. You all might feel like this is a really difficult time for you to be a student and for you to graduate because that's what society is telling you right now, right? That's what the news articles are saying. It's what your parents might be telling you. God, it sucks to be a graduate right now. The job market is difficult. It's really challenging. It's hard, right? Those are probably the messages you're getting over and over and over again. And some of you are probably feeling it or you're internalizing it and you're worried. Am I correct in that assumption? I see a few head nods. Okay. This is the other side to that same story though. I have worked with a lot of students that have graduated into a recession. And the thing that I see that is so special about those groups is that they are grittier and they are more agile and they are more adaptable than other classes of students that I have worked with. That is your secret power. That is what you get to claim. And that is what you get to walk away with. Okay. Maybe out of necessity, because it is a tough market, because that is what you're graduating into, but don't waste it, because that grittiness and that agility and that adaptability is going to serve you very, very well as you go into your career. And I see those students able to pivot faster and easier than other people in their second job and their third job and their fourth jobs now. Okay. And so that's a huge message I want you to walk away with, because employers nowadays, more than ever, they're looking for people who can reinvent themselves over and over again, because you've already seen this. The world of work is changing rapidly. What work looked like even 5 years ago, quite frankly, even a year ago, doesn't look the same as it does right now. And it's going to continue to change pretty quickly. And so your ability to be able to reinvent yourself, to be able to craft a new narrative, to be able to take the skills that you've gotten from one job or one position and to apply it in a very different context is going to be your superpower. It's going to be what makes you great and what allows you to excel. And that's what employers are looking for. They want people who aren't afraid of that challenge. They want people who can look at a problem and figure out, okay, I don't know exactly what the answer is, but I have confidence that I can go through a process and figure it out, right? And they want people who aren't afraid of those things. I will say that generally speaking, folks continue to look for those that are strong communicators. So your writing and your verbal presentation is super important. If you feel like you are lacking in either of those, work on it right now, especially while you're in college. Ask for as much feedback as possible on those two things. Those are going to get you very, very far as well. Focus on your ability to read people, right? And your ability to interact, to persuade, to motivate, to bring people along. Those are things that are never going to be automated, right? So that's also very, very, very important. And then when it comes to automation, having tech fluency is important. And so you don't necessarily need to be able to program, but there's a lot of technology out there. And depending on the type of industry that you're going into, you should be semi-familiar with the tech stack that is sort of used. If you want to go into marketing, learning Marketo and being familiar even with the different types of programs in that area, even if you've never touched the program, is at least one step closer, right? That you've done your research and you're willing to learn and you're open to some of those things. If you do have an ability to actually build some of the tech fluency too, do that as well. It's never going to hurt you. And then lastly, I would say the other skill that spans across any industry is data. Data's everywhere. Your ability to understand data, to manipulate data, to analyze data, to make sense of data, right? To extrapolate what is the insight from that data is going to be really important. You don't need to be able to do all of those things, but you do need to be able to know where you might fit in that funnel and where you might fall. Will be helpful regardless of what industry you go into.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. That was very, very insightful. I'd like to just open up to the floor for anybody who has any questions.
Don't be shy.
Don't be shy.
I'll answer anything.
I have a question. Obviously, as a woman and even as a person.
I have a question. Can you hear me? I don't know.
Who's speaking?
I think we had, okay, I heard two voices. I know Luis was one of them.
Yes.
And I heard a male voice too, but I don't know who it was. So Luis, why don't you go first? And after I answer your question, we will go to the mysterious man who also asked the question.
Okay, awesome. I didn't know if maybe you guys didn't hear me at first, so that's why I stopped for a second. Obviously, as a woman and a woman of color as well, how have you overcome men who want to maybe undermine you or undermine your position and your leadership?
Ooh, I like it. A hard-hitting question. This is definitely a challenge I have certainly faced in a number of different situations. This is how I break it down. So depending on who the individual is, right? this is all, it's actually psychology. You're trying to understand the context or the dynamic of this particular individual. So usually what I try and figure out first is what might be at the core of what this person is doing. Is he insecure about something and therefore feels the need to undermine? Is he worried about his own sort of like stature or prestige or standing with amongst this particular group that I'm in? Is that why he's undermining? Is he literally just a bad listener? Maybe he's just not listening, right? And so that's why he's undermining. Or is he just a jerk, right? Like sometimes people really just are. And that's like all it is, right? And there is no underlying thing, that just is, right? And so knowing which of these different categories someone might fall into is super helpful because, or I'm sorry, there's a fifth category, which is like simply unaware, like maybe doing it, not even realizing that he's doing it at all, and would be horrified to know that he was doing it and actually would not ever want to do that, right? Okay, so you got to kind of have to like start to figure out one of these things. Now, if this is someone who is a coworker of mine, so it's someone I know I'm going to have to work with, or it's a supervisor, it's like someone that's not going away, I'm going to take the time to try and figure out where this person might fall, because I'm going to use a different strategy depending on which bucket this person falls into. Now, honestly, the easiest is if it's just unawareness, because I can have a conversation with someone who's unaware in a really nice way and just sort of let them know like, hey, you know, in the meeting we were just in, I mentioned X, Y, and Z, and you kind of swooped in with this comment, which you probably didn't intend for it to come across this way, but it sort of undermined me or my position or what I was saying. I'm just curious, did you notice sort of like what happened in that situation? Like, I would love your point of view on that, and just engage him in a conversation around what might have happened, right? So that we can just sort of be open about the situation. I would probably do something similar if he were insecure or possibly worried about his standing. I would have a direct conversation about some of that and would probably ask some questions around like, hey, I noticed you said X, Y, and Z. Were you thinking or were you nervous about something else? Or are you trying to make sure that they can see your point about here? Because if that's the case, I can back you up on that next time. Like, I'll make sure to help support that, right? Because maybe all they need is to feel like they also have some support in some ways. And then I can use that as my way to be like, so if you don't undermine me, I can support you, right? And we can have a good little exchange here, right? That sort of thing. Now, if this is something where somebody might undermine me in a meeting and it's a client, or it's somebody that is from another office that I don't know if I'm necessarily going to interact with, I don't have like a deep relationship with, or something like that, and I sort of have to like address it in the moment, I might say, if somebody's being condescending or taking my idea or something along those lines, there have been moments where somebody might say something and my response might be something along the lines of, that's really interesting. I love that idea. It's really similar to the one that I just mentioned earlier. So I think we should totally build off of that. Right. And I sort of like, I kind of keep it light, but I definitely address the fact that like, yeah, actually, it sounds a lot like what I was just saying. I'm glad you like it. So like, let's build on that and sort of find ways to kind of move the conversation along. And then I can have the more serious conversation offline with the individual afterward. So sorry, that was a long answer, Louise. I hope that's helpful.
No, thank you so much.
All right.
No problem. And then I know there was, go ahead, Bryce. Go ahead, Bryce.
Well, I was just going to say, I don't think we have time for any more questions. However, if you guys are still looking to answer questions, you can definitely follow Christine, like she said, on LinkedIn, and just ask to have her as a connection, and then just ask her questions through there. I'm pretty sure she wouldn't mind. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for coming. This has been an amazing event. Thank you for your question, Louise. Sorry we couldn't get to any others, but thank you guys for coming, and I hope you guys have learned something tonight.
Thank you all so much for having me. I hope you have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thanks for hosting. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Of course, you all have a great night.
Thank you.